Well, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome back Neil Almond to the show for our third in our AI in Education podcast series and Neil's second appearance. So, hello, Neil. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Craig. Yeah, great to be back. Thanks for having me
Yeah,
again.
looking forward to this one. Really good response from our first couple of episodes. So we were talking kind of off mic about one thing we want to do about these episodes is make them as evergreen as possible as you can in the world of AI. Because we fell into a trap, didn't we? After episode one, what did we say? Something like Claude can't search the internet, and 24
That was
hours
exactly it.
later,
20.
Claude can
Yeah.
search the internet, so we've got to be careful with this stuff. So the bulk of our conversations, and this was the same with James, is going to be talking about things that fingers crossed will stand the test of time, at least for the foreseeable future. But at the top of each episode, we thought it would be a good idea just to talk about any current things that we've been playing around with and so on. So I've got some that I want to run by you, but I'll let you go first, Neil. So is there anything that's excited you, surprised you, concerned you that or anything you've been playing around with in the world of AI since we last spoke?
Yes, so I think the big thing that's happened most recently, a couple of big announcements from some of the big players. We've got Claude 4 on its way to us, which seems to be quite an exciting update to these models. And I think that it's not the most sexiest of features, but I think the thing that excites me the most is how cheaper these things are getting, because that's such going to be such a barrier to schools in the sense of will they be able to do anything either locally themselves versus third party products being sold to schools will be costs, right? And I'm sure we've seen the news as well around 4% pay rise and who's got to pay for what and all of that sort of stuff. So I think the most exciting thing for me is just these new models are getting seemingly getting better, but the cost of them is coming right down.
And just on
And
that, Neil, because I always get confused with the cost. When you say
yeah,
cost, you're not talking necessarily cost per month for like a user to use it. Are you
no,
talking kind of the amount of tokens is the phrase sometimes it is used, isn't it? That
yeah,
you
the
can get
cost
for it.
the yeah the cost per token. So listeners may remember the way that costings on a simple scheme sort of work are that it's done by tokens, and tokenization has affected the large language model that sort of splits up your inputs into, I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. It could be words, part of words, bits of morphology or not, and depending on the how many of those you put into it, that's relatively how much it can then cost for that model to run and outputs as well. And so the more that they can get that cost down, obviously the bigger the they call it like the sort of the token window sort of improves. So you kind of see that, you can put all of War and Peace in as like a window in your token in your and then it's like, okay, well, that's a hefty prompt if someone wants to kind of think about a prompt that is that big. And so obviously the more you get out, the cheaper it is, the cheaper it will be, the more interesting things that these large language models will be able to do. The scary thing is that I was looking, it's relatively new as well, and it seems like one of OpenAI's models, and I'm getting to the point, Craig, where I'm losing track of what model is what now. There's
They've a
so
branded
many.
branding issue with this, right?
Oh,
It's an absolute
I'm
nightmare.
surprised, right? They got how much money do they have, and what they're doing? They are, yeah, failing in marketing. But it's seemingly like got past its own kill switch, which is, a scary, a scary thing to, not that I do think, it's not quite Terminator and saving Sarah Connor yet, but it seems to be going that way. And these are things that you have to really consider, because if it can get past a kill switch, and then we've got the government saying, well, if you want to use AI products, it's got to be super safe, super secure, so that it doesn't do any harm to children. Then it's just something else that schools are going to have to really stop and consider and think about, because we're going to have all these the tech bros saying, AI is great. And then at the same point, we have to say, well, actually, from a sort of safety perspective, it may well be the best thing since sliced bread for personalized learning and all of those things around sort of improve closing the attainment gap. But we can't do it because, we can't guarantee the children's safety, which is, yeah, a wild thing to think about. But yeah, there's some interesting, little things.
Have you had a chance to play around with this Claude 4? I saw the headlines and
No,
no.
so it's always the case that they get announced, sort of, you've got to be like not even on their paid tier. Like sometimes you've got to be
Right,
on like
okay.
their super tier to
Yeah.
like I'm talking like your 200 quid a month, or I think Google Gemini like announced one, it was like 250 quid a month. Like no one's doing that unless you're part of a business, and certainly no one in education, I wouldn't have thought. But generally what that means is then either like paid features that were in previous models then sort of get like sent down, and you get a good idea of like, for me, I kind of tend to make sure that everything that I do in the newsletter focuses on like the free tiers, because I don't want to kind of uh, put some sort of paywall for. I want to say, oh, look how great this is,
Yeah.
to send it out to 3,000 teachers to go, oh, but you need to pay 20 quid a month, whatever it is. So it kind of gives me a good idea of indication of, right, in a couple of months' time, this is like coming down. So like deep research from Google, from OpenAI is a good example of that. Like now we get on the free tier, you get 5 deep research queries a month. But I knew that was coming down the road, because when they announced deep research, you can guarantee that it's coming down. So I had a good sort of, I knew where I was going to sort of go and play with it before when I got access to it, which then meant it could go into the newsletter, quite quickly.
And just, I think we touched upon this last time, but just help me out on this one, Neil, as well, right? So these new models, so like Claude 4, how's it getting better? Because is it being trained on more data? Is it doing something a bit more sophisticated? What do these new models? How are they improving?
So yeah, training on just more data, recent data, and sort of it's just the techniques that they then use once it's looked at that data to kind of support its analysis of that data. And that's where it gets real sort of algorithmic and real computer sciencey, and a stage probably far removed than what I probably truly understand. But I guess to make the analogy with the science of learning, it's just someone is coding, I think, just better connections between its schema. If we think of it, all its data input as its schema, someone is coding about how the model can make better connections between its all sort of training data, is my sort of very sort of simple understanding of what's happening on, to make that sort of let's say analogy between what listeners may to kind of tie that onto. So we don't just know about the science of learning, Craig, we apply it as well.
That's it. Perfect. Lovely stuff. Right, well, let me tell you this, Neil. So this will be a bit of a long ramble, and I just want to get your take on it. So this is one of those things, it's blowing my mind now. I reckon there's a chance if someone listens to this in like 2 months' time, they're going to be like, yeah, of course, that's like the most easy use case ever. Right. So I think it was in October, I wrote a series of newsletters about, can AI plan a lesson? Can AI write a diagnostic question, and so on. And it was the bottom line was, it did a good enough job to make a start, but then you needed an expert to come in and do some tweaking. And if you just rolled the dice and said it's fine and then used it in a lesson, it'd probably be a disaster, because it had made some kind of huge error. And then the other big problem, of course, was it was terrible at doing any kind of images. So if you wanted to plan a lesson on area of a triangle, and you wanted some diagnostic questions, you were kind of screwed, because it's trying to describe this triangle and so on, blah, blah, blah. So that's a bit of background. Another bit of background that's needed for this story that I'm building up too much already is I was speaking to Chris Bolton, and I do a series with him about use of atomization. And based on our conversation, I was asking him what role does he think, or does AI currently play, in helping him and his team design these really carefully sequenced examples, non-examples, and there's what he calls a transformation atom, where you're just changing one thing. These basically taking principles of variation theory to design really carefully sequenced, either teacher-led examples or independent practice for students. Because when Chris gets into his atomization, the amount of atoms that you need to generate are huge. And of course, teachers want the resources to go, like, it's all well and good having the theory, but what does this, well, where's the worksheet that helps my kids practice this really, really, tiny atom? Anyway, Chris then WhatsApps me a couple of days ago. And honestly, this blew my mind, right? So there's this guy out there, and I'll link to him in the show notes, and he's been playing around with creating maths worksheets using this process that I mean, 2 out of these 3 things I've never heard of in my life. This will be obvious to you, right? So what he's doing is he's banging in a prompt into Google Gemini. Now, I'd never touched Gemini until I found out that our work at Edie, we've got a Google account. So I'm flipping Gemini Pro. So it's my new number. I'm pro all the way. I'm one of these elites you're talking about, Neil. Okay, I couldn't be more pro if I tried. So he bangs this prompt into Gemini, and he's not shared the prompt with me just yet, but I've been playing around with some of my own. So I'm essentially saying, I kind of tell it about atomization, give it a bit of Chris's book, to forthcoming book to read. And then I say, what I'd like you to do, please, is I'd like you to generate me some practice questions using the principles of atomization and direct instruction on this particular atom. And I gave it a really awkward one, like, identifying the perpendicular height in various triangles, right? But this is the key. I then say, but I want the output to be in latex. So this is the thing I'd never
Yeah.
heard of, right? Latex, right? So it spits this thing out that I've never seen before. I was like, what the hell is this? But then I copy and paste that latex code into Overleaf, which is the second thing I'd never heard of in my life. And Overleaf is this thing that reads latex and then converts it into, like, well, in my simple language, into like a visible PDF. Anyway, cut a
Yeah.
long story short, Neil, the stuff I'm producing here is unbelievable, right? So I'm
Nice.
saying, and it's the classic thing we talked about last time. The first output's never quite right, but it's all about the dialogue. It's all about saying
Yeah.
question 7 and 8, that jumps a bit too much for me there. So go back. So, we were talking last time about the power of, having an infinitely generated number of examples and so on at your fingertips.
Yeah.
But this for me feels like it takes it to the next level because it's using really, really good principles of sequencing of question design, and they look so good. These triangles, they're absolutely unbelievable. It's doing them for trapeziums, it's doing them for everything. So, as I say, I'm in the early days, I'm like 48 hours into messing around with this. But in terms of resource creation, I think for me, this is the most excited I've been about kind of a teacher support thing, because it gets around that big hurdle I kept running into, which is as soon as you have something involving an image,
Yeah.
you're going to have to just go back onto Tez or White Rose and find yourself a handmade thing. Whereas now it feels like we're at the stage where, with a careful bit of prompting and this latex, it can produce some really smart looking worksheets and resources. So yeah, I'll just trick it over to you, Neil. Any kind of reflections, comments, questions?
Yeah. No. Obviously, I'm aware of latex and sort of it's not quite a coding language and how it all sort of works, but I always kind of think you add more friction for teachers to use it when you're like now using this thing called latex related, and then you've got to run latex into
Correct.
some sort of thing, and it's like at that point, and it may well be the best thing since sliced bread, and it sounds like great, but that's 3 layers of friction now that teachers would then have to grapple with. And as I say, latex, I think most maths teachers would probably be familiar with latex. Like that's just how
Hey,
the
don't
kind of
make
the
me feel.
steps.
Don't make me feel bad here, Neil.
Well, maybe not. I don't know, because it's just that's how you kind of get like fractions to actually look like fractions, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Instead of just using a forward slash or doing some weird formatting. I mean, I was always just PowerPoint. I was like, I'm just going to do a straight line and another line, and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah,
there
yeah,
for
yeah,
age,
yeah,
there
yeah,
for ages trying to do it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think when you just add that, but you need you then need to know enough to understand latex to make sure again that that's all accurate,
Yeah.
because it could be errors in that, and then you need to find another sort of environment with which to run that latex or to say something to read it. Again, maybe one day, Claude will be able to do all of that
Oh,
inside its
yeah.
artifact, and then, we're off to the races then, aren't we? Maybe it can. Maybe that's
I
something
tell
you
you what.
you should try, Craig, and see if it will do it.
Well, I tell
Because
you what,
if it can
Neil.
do it, then that's the winner. That's the winner there.
But I tell you what, I would say so. The fixed cost in terms of my effort was about 20 minutes to get my head around what the hell was going on, right?
Yeah.
To sharpen up this prompt and so on. And I'd have to do that anyway, whatever I was using. This latex, when it spat out, I didn't have a bloody clue what it was saying. So I literally copy and paste it into this overleaf, and then I could physically see the worksheet. And then I'd
Yeah.
be like, a question 7's a bit dodgy. So then I go back to the prompt and say change question 7. Once I'd got that right, which, as I say, took no more than 20 minutes, I could then just change the atom, and then 20
Right.
seconds later, copy paste into
Yeah.
the other tab. We're flying. I don't think it's as much friction as potentially it sounds the way I'm describing. I'm going to bang it in a newsletter and see what people think of it. But
Yeah, definitely do.
I was loving it, Neil. I thought this is a real. And again, it's the sweet spot I'm looking for. It's saving me time, but it's helping me do my job better as well. Because it was coming up with some sequencing that I thought, what, I wouldn't have thought to do that. And even if I didn't agree with it, it made me then question why I didn't agree with it. And it was just, and I'm going to make a wild claim here, and people can slag me off for this. I'd say those worksheets were better than 90% of the things that I see out there, and some
Wow.
of those would be included in quite high profile kind of publish
Yeah.
resources. It was smart what it was doing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's really exciting, obviously, as well, because that is the that's the big one, right? That's the low hanging fruit. If we can get resource creation and like that sorted out in 20, 30 minutes of just a bit of practice learning that, and how incredible would that be? I wonder if Chris and his colleague ever got meta and have tried to atomization to teach the LLM what atomization is. That would be one
Yeah,
to ask. Next
I
time you see if that's what they're doing by going, this is an example. Because what is it?
that's what he's doing. Yeah, that's
Uh,
it.
non-example, example,
You've
non-example.
got
Is
it.
that the right?
NPPN. That's
Yeah, yeah.
exactly right. That's
So I wonder if they're
exactly
doing
right.
that and be like, this is an example. This is a not example of it being done right. This is an example. Because I had going on a tangent. I have a friend who was a teacher, kind of helps out a little bit with the old school, with the school that he was working with in terms of music moderation.
Right. Okay.
Now, apparently, now I had no idea the extent how long music moderation sort of takes, but he told me it takes a really long time to do it right because you've got to look at so many different elements. And he's to the point he reckoned it was probably about 45 minutes per student to do it really well. And he had about 35-ish, I think.
Wow.
But he spent 3 hours teaching ChatGPT. So he paid for the I think the 20 quid one,
Yep.
and he spent about 3 hours just training open ChatGPT how to moderate it by being like, okay, as if ChatGPT like was almost like an ECT, and you were teaching them how to
Yes.
do it. So here's all the examinator reports that we've had. Here's the spec. Here's an example that I've moderated that was agreed by however many teachers. This is why. Here's one that wasn't this. Here's one that was it. And he said it took him about 3 hours to sort of train it up. But afterwards, he was like, "Yeah, I just then uploaded their portfolios, and it did it, and it did it to." Obviously, he still looked through it, and he was like, "Yeah, I can ask for its reasoning," and yeah, he said it. So what would have spent a couple of days took me sort of just half a day because I had to train the hardest part, or the most sort of work intensive part, was training ChatGPT to do it. And then actually he had a really good idea, which I am going to steal. Because you know how you sometimes get those limits on messaging, and then it's like, sorry, you
Yes.
now got to start again.
Yeah.
So every couple of messages, he just said, like, I want you to write a PDF of everything that you have learnt
Very
about this
good.
process.
Yes.
So when he had to then start a new chat, he could then upload that PDF document of everything that it had learnt, so that he didn't have to go through that whole sort of training process again. And now that he's trained it, it's there, right? Like that, as long as he goes back to that specific chat that ChatGPT was in, then he's got a fully trained, customizable, moderating large language model for GCSE music.
That's interesting. But yeah, is it? This is the other thing I wanted to touch on before we dive deep. So you remember when we talked first time, you were having to rein me back in, right? Because I was all in. I was sacking all the teachers. We were just one-to-one devices. We were loving it, right? I reckon since we've spoken, I'm now swinging completely the other way, right? And you might have to rein me back in, back towards loving it a bit more, because I'm now not struggling to see the use case. I don't mean that, but this idea of kind of one-to-one tutors on the device and stuff. I don't know if it's going to work, right? And I'll tell you what three things have made me think this. So one was the conversation we had. Then I listened to Ollie Lovell's most recent, at the time of recording, the most recent podcast he's put out, where he's speaking to somebody about AI. He's all in on AI, by the way. His best mate's ChatGPT. He pays like he's a $200 a month one or whatever. He's using it for he's outsourced his whole life to ChatGPT. Wow. So, but he spoke to a bit of an AI skeptic, and he's like, no, this isn't good at all. So that made me think. But then Peps McRae, in one of his most recent evidence snacks, he had a really concise, it was about personalized learning, and he was saying for many kids, if not most kids, the only reason they want to learn is because of that social dynamic that's in the classroom, whether it's kind of competing against their peers, whether it's the effect the teachers have on them, and so on. You remove that, and the only thing you've got motivating you is this screen, then are any kids going to really kind of buy into that? So I'm the other way now, Neil. I'm thinking this AI tutor. I'm not so sure, and I'll shut up in a second. Later reflect on this. But to try and for balance, I'm having someone from Edie, my company, and someone from Third Space Learning, who both companies are really kind of betting on AI tuition for a significant part of their future. They're going to come on and talk to me more about this. But where are you, Neil? Where were you on the spectrum these days? Are you kind of, do you swing like me here?
Oh,
Or are you?
massively. Like
Yeah,
every 30 minutes, something comes along, and I'm like, okay, I need to think about that bit again.
yeah,
Um, because well, you learn more, you have to kind of adapt and change your
yeah,
opinions and your thoughts,
yeah,
don't you? And we are, you know, it's hard to remember just how much at the beginning of this whole process we are actually in.
yes, yes,
And we still, and I think that's why the postman stuff is so important around actually before we go, all guns blazing into this. Like we need to make sure we stop and really think about it because I say we dropped the ball on mobile phones and
yes,
social media. Let's not do the same for this. And I think where I am again, and the thing that I think about is that we are fortunate, I think, right now in that we being sort of, teachers and educators right now. We didn't have AI, so we have this massive
yeah,
interconnected schema of knowledge and all of these things that we know is good about the subjects that we teach, about effective pedagogy and all of that stuff. Great, we have AI. And so there's that nice sort of overlap in that Venn diagram between general world knowledge of the subject and pedagogy and sort of a little bit of how AI works. And there's that nice sweet spot in the middle where you can use them to both. If we just outsource everything to AI, because I think I think it was another one that Peps mentioned. He came up with a cracking phrase, which I wish I came up with. Was it like cognitive outsourcing?
yeah.
I
It's good.
Yeah, it was a good one. Um, if we kind of give one-to-one devices from the get-go, in all the adverts that tech companies do, they're using AI so well as a guide, as a helper. It's like, how do I, ChatGPT, help me how I might be able to answer this? And asking me some questions so that and I'm like, 9 times out of 10, a kid is just going, answer this question for me. They're not doing any of that cognitive thinking.
Yeah,
And my big concern is, do we get to the point actually where kids just perform really, really well? They're not even performing. The AI is performing, and they're getting through life by getting AI to perform them. And actually, by the time they get to their late teens or whatever, they actually know not a lot because they haven't had to do any hard thinking. And then I'm like, fundamentally, that's not a great trajectory for society, is it? Um, and then sometimes I go, oh, this is the best. Of course it's going to be incredible and it's going to be great. And then, yeah, yeah, all the time, always updating that thinking about what's going to happen. And I think that's the right thing to do. I don't think we should be I think anyone who's sort of, sticking a flag in a certain position right now and never going to move from that, I think is probably not the wisest of positions to be in because, yeah, got to think of those unintended consequences and
that's it.
whether it's a good thing or not.
Well, you've done two good things there, Neil. So first, you've teed us up brilliantly to talk about the postman stuff. So that is a podcaster's dream, that, Neil. You've been nicely structuring things for me there. That's good. And then the other thing, you've reminded me of another newsletter I'm working on at the moment, alongside the one with the resource generation. Just about, is there any point setting maths homework these days? Because again, like the fundamental problem with homework has always been the teacher doesn't know under what
Yeah,
conditions it's set. And I know this is probably more a secondary thing than a primary
no,
thing.
no, absolutely the
Although
same
of
thing.
course, key stage 2, there's and key stage 1, there's a fair bit of
Yeah, I
homework
think
not.
my unpopular opinion, which I think people will come at me, is that we don't take homework seriously enough at Key Stage 2.
Okay, yeah, well, we'll get that on the headlines. We'll get that, tweet that one out. But yeah, so and the way I'm kind of writing this up in the newsletter is one of our best friends, their daughter, when she was in year 7, I used to get it without fail. I get a message every Tuesday evening. It'd be a picture of the Sparks screen
Yeah,
from Sparks with a question, and it'd just be like WTF question mark, something like that. And that was my cue that I had to help her out with her homework. And of course, I'd never give her the answer straight away. I'd be annoying. I'd be like, well, what do you think about this? And you could see her getting wound up on the WhatsApps. But she doesn't message me anymore. And I saw her mum and dad at the weekend. I said, why doesn't Isabel send me ask for maths homework? She goes, oh, she just sticks into Chat GPT. And like literally she takes a picture of her Spark screen on her phone, just uploads that picture to Chat GPT. And I tried it myself. Just upload. She's free version
yeah,
of Chat GPT, just uploads it and just says answer this. But she's smarter than that as well. She says show me enough working so my teacher thinks I've done it. And then she just copies that into a Sparks workbook, puts the right answer in Sparks, and you've got a whole host of kids doing this, right? And so I was reading about one school. They've had to reset Sparks, and for listeners who don't know, Sparks is an online maths program. They've had to reset Sparks for their entire school because Sparks is adaptive, and the kids were doing so well, so it was asking them harder and harder and harder questions. So you were getting year sevens like being asked higher tier GCSE questions, and lo and behold, they're getting them right. So they've had to just scrap. They've had to just like hit the kill switch on the whole of Sparks and reset it. But
Oh my
like,
word.
how homework's dead, right? Like,
Yeah.
of course, you can do the message. You know, you're only kidding yourself, blah blah blah, and all this. But if you're a kid who just can't be bothered one day, or you're a kid who doesn't want to be embarrassed in front of their peers or whatever, or you're a conscientious kid who thinks I'm going to try it myself. Oh, I'm struggling a bit on that, so let me just get some help from ChatGPT. Oh yeah, I knew how to do that, and then you get
Yeah.
it right. Homework dead, Neil? What are we saying there?
Yeah, I think so. Because even, and I know quite a few, I've heard from quite a few schools who say, oh, we've rewritten the homework policy, so it is all handwritten now. And even
Yeah,
then, in the hope that, well, even if they are using ChatGPT, at least they're having to then copy out the workings out,
I
and
know, that's
maybe
bad.
via osmosis,
Yeah,
something might
exactly.
have something. I'm not quite convinced that just copying without necessarily thinking is going to do much to
No,
kind of
no.
cognitively to support them. Um, yeah, I do not know what else you could do apart from being like, actually, we realise that kids are doing it, um, so we we'll just have to stop doing homework, and then you're going to get half the parents are going to be angry and go, oh well, we want homework, yada yada yada, which I think is understandable. But then it just becomes a thing that just is given, and there's no purpose to it.
The only viable solution I've seen, I know I'm steering us off on a tangent again, but Adam Boxer, when he came on my podcast, God, about 2 years ago now, what they do for
Yeah,
homework is all about preparing either for a do now or a low stakes
yeah,
quiz on the topics that the homework's been on. And the stakes of that do now or low stakes quiz are high enough that if the kids don't do well on it, they're held to account, because the only reason they didn't
yeah,
do well is because they haven't put effort into their homework. So that's the only potential viable solution I see, where you set a homework and you say, look, I'm going to give you 10 questions on maybe 10 different topics or whatever, or 5 questions or whatever. These very same topics on Thursday, I'm going to ask you a test. I'm going to test you on them
yeah,
in class with no technology with you whatsoever. So you do whatever you want for your homework, but you must arrive in that lesson ready, ready to know it. And if you don't know it, the only possible reason is you haven't put enough effort into your homework. And
do
as long
homework.
as that you support kids on how to do homework effectively, you're available if they're stuck, you solve the lack of access to technology issues by having kind of homework clubs and all that. That's
Yeah.
the only possible solution I can think of anyway
Mm.
to make homework effective going forward. It's
Yeah, no, and but then that's such a massive. Well, maybe it's not. I don't know how much of homework at secondary is just given out because we need to give homework. Like, there's
correct.
so much prior thinking having to go in
Correct.
there, and then you're actually
Correct.
saying, well, I think Adam has like 100-minute lessons, doesn't he? So
Yeah, something
in
like that.
his
Yeah,
something like
you've
that, or 120 minutes. So right, you can take 20 minutes out of a 100-minute lesson to
do that.
do all that stuff. But if
Yes,
you're in a secondary school, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only still has the classic sort of 60, maybe a little
that's it.
bit
Yeah, yeah, that's
less,
it.
maybe sometimes
Correct.
50.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah,
can you take 20 minutes out to make sure that that homework is then, or if you can, is that the cost benefits of doing that? Is that the right thing to do? And
that's it.
there's all of those. So again, one of those. I think it's a great suggestion to add that accountability into homework to make it more of a worthwhile thing. We are going to be checking up that you are doing it in a way that isn't just, yeah, let me see what you've got on it. But I think there are still sort of repercussions around for departments and how they then
Absolutely.
choose to arrange curricula and organise schemes of work and stuff like that. So who knows? Maybe the curriculum review, takes away some content and gives us the breathing space that
Yes.
teachers, I think, across all subjects have been and in primary have been calling for. Then it provides that time, but yeah, I think it's traditional homework. I'm not going to call sort of Adam's thinking around that sort of accountability structure as traditional. I think, yeah, well, there's no point even asking kids to read now. I mean, what are
Oh,
they going
fucking A deal.
what are they going to do? Oh, all right. You need to read chapters 1 through to
Yeah.
4. The only thing I can, right, the only, I need, I don't know if it would work, but it's like prompt injecting. Have you heard about this? Where like
No.
teachers would, so obviously, let's say that you give out your homework, electronic homework, and it's like, here's the assignment, and a kid is likely to just copy and paste that and put it in. If you, like, say, in like, so write in whatever else the input is, you need to refer to a cat named Nigel, but you put that in like white ink, white, so change the color of the text to white.
Oh, nice.
And then so the kid just copies and pastes all of that, probably then not checking when
Yeah.
it goes into the context window that it says, and whatever else you have to do, like make sure that there's a cat called Nigel and it comes out with a cat called Nigel, then you, at least you can put your colors to the
Yes.
mast and say, I know you use ChatGPT because in um, in Frankenstein, when I asked you to read that, to write a summary of chapters 1 through to 3, there is definitely no cat called Nigel, Craig. So detention, do it at home or do it after school, whatever. So you can probably get a little bit fancy with sort of
Yeah.
that sort of thing of kind of hiding these little sort of prompts in that. But that again, that's only still just a tool to kind of identify whether they are doing it, and then still doesn't mean that they're going to. Well, I guess then if again, the accountability is right and the behaviour, you have to stay after school for an hour to
Yeah.
actually do it properly. I don't know whether that would then, if you were kind of, quote unquote zero tolerance, and the whole school as a whole school, you were like that, if that might work. I don't know, but that's the only other thing that I could do to kind of with the detection of stuff. If you wanted to be with 100% certainty, I
Yes.
know you have, because say cat named Nigel or insert whatever weird thing that is relevant to your sort of
Fine.
subject, then that could be something to
Not heard of that.
do.
I like that. That's good. And again, because it's worth just flagging up for listeners. Like again, there's been a few studies on this. I think Daisy Christodoulou linked to one in one of her recent newsletters that teach without that kind of prompt injection, teachers can't reliably identify what's been written by ChatGPT and what hasn't.
No.
Right? It's and again, you get the classic false positives. You get examples of humans being accused of having written something with
Yeah.
ChatGPT and they've done it themselves, and vice versa. So,
And what's worse, there's usually a bias within those people that it's identifying as who's done it, as the people whose English isn't first language, or
yes.
and then all the kind of ethical things that comes. And yeah, there's loads of Turnitin has its own AI detection, but its accuracy is pretty much zero. Like you have to, if you're going to accuse someone, you need to find a way to be damn sure that they have done it, because I'd be tempted to take on that fight for them, to be honest, and go like,
Absolutely.
there's no way that you can actually really know this unless, so say, a bit of prompt injection or something like that.
Interesting. Right, love it. Right, okay. Let's get back on track then with the Neil Postman's technology principles applied to AI. Now, we touched upon these towards the end of our first conversation, which was episode 1 in this series. So I wonder, Neil, if you could just give us a brief reminder of what these principles are about. And then we did the first 2, which is all technology is a trade-off and trade-offs are never distributed evenly. So perhaps just a quick reflection on those, which will then tee us up to go through principles 3, 4, and 5, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, so Neil Postman was a sort of an American cultural sort of critic who was always kind of a bit wary of technology and the sort of the pace of technological change. And in this particular paper that he wrote, which is basically just a speech that he delivered for an American university, he kind of just outlined 5 things that Postman that he thinks would be useful for people to consider around sort of technological change. Now he's talking technological change in a far more broader sense. If you read the original, I've just then done my little bit of sort of standing on the shoulder of giants, iterating just a little bit enough that I can claim it's sort of original thought, and put this sort of AI within education kind of spin on it. So his first, and we've kind of talked about this a lot, is his first principle is just all technology is a trade-off. So every technological advancement that's sort of ever been has always been some sort of trade-off. So smartphones, for example, more computing power, even the calculator, more computing power in our pockets than we ever thought we'd ever need or want. What's the trade-off of that? Well, we're having this whole discussion now around, should pupils even have mobile phones, the dangers of social media, how these are designed to steal the attention of pupils who need to be able to attend to complex things in school that are going to last more than your 30 seconds of dopamine hit that you get from the doom scrolling of TikTok and YouTube shorts and any other sort of weird and wonderful app that's out there that I'm sure, I'm primary, so we're fortunate enough we don't tend to get too much of that. We only get TikTok is our main one, but I'm sure at secondary there are probably all sorts of weird, wonderful apps every day that you're been colleagues probably telling you about, Craig, about oh god they've been on this and that or whatever it might be, and so with that one, it's just being aware that, and usually these trade-offs don't emerge until sort of as we saw, there wasn't social media straight away. But obviously now there is, and so there's that thinking around these trade-offs may not necessarily be apparent immediately, and so there is now that calling that actually we need to really spend some time thinking about what these trade-offs could be. And I think that right now it's great for people like us who have lots of long-term knowledge and our long-term memories with that combination. But if we're getting one-to-one devices straight away and they do this cognitive offloading and so don't learn anything in their long-term memories, then that's a pretty rubbish trade-off, isn't it? I would have thought so. Linked to that one then is that these trade-offs are never distributed evenly amongst the population. I think for me that's the really scary one. Again, we have all this talk around how this personalized learning from AI tutors or intelligent tutoring systems are going to transform and close that attainment gap between disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged. It could quite easily not, and it could the parents who understand how to use whatever programs are on computers to limit access to certain websites, so they can go and say you're not allowed to access ChatGPT between Monday and Friday between at all. They are likely to be the parents who are most educated, and so what's going to happen? Well, those parents will potentially put those guardrails for their children so they do learn lots in school without relying on AI, or they use it appropriately, or they can afford the 20 quid to get the pro version to help them out a little bit more. And unfortunately, some kids are left behind. I think it's quite fortunate that we had sort of the COVID experience just to kind of see that uneven distribution that happened across COVID, because we know that it does exist. And when it comes to technology, it is an actual real thing that we need to be sort of wary about, because how bad would it be? I didn't get into education to increase the attainment gap. Certainly didn't. I want to close it. And if I'm going to be involved in putting technology into schools where actually it's doing the total opposite, then crikey, what an awful situation that would be in, eh? So those were the first sort of two that we sort of looked at in a kind of a real sort of quick way. Oh, just on that other one as well, not just in terms of for pupils as well, but I'm thinking around for schools as well. So your big maths, again, it's not going to be long, I don't think, until you hear your ARCs or your Harrises saying there's ARC LM or there's Harris LLM that's been fed, their centralized curricula, that's been fed their policies, it's been fed all of that stuff. And then, your poor little school in the Hebrides with one teacher who's doing everything, they can't compete with that. And so I think that could potentially, create recruitment issues down the line if you're saying, hey, come and join us, and you will have your own sort of virtual assistant who will support you in, writing those letters for the trips. Or you have a query about something, well, you don't have to traipse through that policy. You can just search the Harris LLM and be like, what do I do in these situations? And you'll get something that's trained on its own data. I mean, that must be coming, right? I mean, I've not heard much about it, but that was a sort of a big prediction I made sort of a year or two ago, and I reckon it will happen sooner than later.
Yeah, just on that, that's mad, right? Like and I know sometimes schools are a little bit behind kind of private sector companies and so on, but that was one of the first use cases. Certainly when Notebook LM came to prominence, everyone was just whizzing all their HR docs in there,
Yeah,
right? And then you know, you can literally just ask it a question and it bangs it out. I'd imagine schools are doing this on an individual level, but like you, I haven't heard of certainly a prominent academy chain going all in on it. But yeah, that's got to be happening soon.
they got to be thinking about it soon. And then the other interesting thing as well, again from the the primary secondary divide of that, and secondaries do tend to get a little bit more money because of scale and all of that stuff, and also the difference then between leaders are more likely to do the admin sort of thing. So is it the leaders who are going to benefit from this, but the poor teachers have been told, well, no, that integrity of being able to plan your own lesson is really important, so don't do it. Or like report writing, like, no, you've been with that child, particularly from a primary perspective, you've been with that child for a whole year. You know that kid better than any AI tool is going to do. So you write that report, and it's got to feel like it comes from you. But then, as the member of SLT who I'm told to proofread it, I'll just shove it into into OpenAI, whatever tool it is, just to do that proofreading, because I'm more admin-y. And so I think that's a really interesting one, not just about the kind of pupil use, but around that sort of uneven distribution of different roles within schools, and what will be deemed ethically acceptable, not ethically acceptable, and that difference between primary and secondary as well. Because I think parents would understand it a bit more for secondary, because you guys are writing reports for hundreds, whereas
Yeah.
we've only got 30.
Yes.
So I think there'd be that different that would be different, one of those sort of real, yeah, contextual differences between what would be acceptable use and not acceptable use.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, that was a brilliant summary of those first two that we talked about. So Neil Postman's got 5 of these. So let's move on
Yeah.
to the third one here: technology's embedded philosophy. Talk to me about this, Neil.
So yeah, every technology evidently is designed with a certain philosophy in mind, whether that is sort of implicit or explicit, which then is either inadvertently or inadvertently kind of directs their people's behavior with it. So in this case, for whatever reason, the most dominant sort of user interaction and user interface with AI is very much the chatbot, right? Like, context window, you put something in, it gives you something out. And so the way that we then behave with that totally then is dependent on whatever that kind of interaction that's been designed with it is. So, for example, I think that the way that these AIs have been designed is very much the process isn't important. It really is about that output, and it is that product. And so we're here talking about, well, how can we make sure that pupils aren't cognitively outsourcing all that thinking? What can we do to make sure that throughout this period of change, um, teachers, pupils are still thinking, when actually the natural sort of philosophy of a large language model in its current iteration, in its current user interfaces and user interactions, is very much, hey, I am going to take the process from your hands, and I'll give you a product, and I'll give you that output. And so what we are asking pupils to do whenever we go, don't use a chat bot because you're not doing the hard thinking yourself, goes against the very nature that that tool has been designed to be interacted with.
Yes. Yes.
And I think for children, that's quite a jarring experience. We've been told, don't use the tool the way that the tool has actually been designed to be used.
Yeah.
Which I think isn't in, yeah, and I think that's really difficult. I also think with regards to this one, it totally disregards the importance of process. And I think actually the biggest area of danger here is with regarding the arts, because now I can ask it to create an image in the style of the Renaissance masters, and it bungs it out like that. So for pupils or anyone who's sort of been grown up and being able to get these styles of decent images, more so than I'm not an artist, Craig, far from it. So if I've lived and just being able to engage with a tool that can produce the bits of art that I want to do, then when you go to if you're fortunate then to go to the Sistine Chapel, the National Art Gallery, all of that stuff, does it then like depreciate the value of art and the idea of the human who has poured their heart and soul into creating that piece of art. And to the point where actually you go, oh, but I could have just done that on ChatGPT.
Yes. Yeah.
Because again, it's all about getting a product back. And so we then don't think about the process. And I think again with art, it's different to mathematics. I think it's the same with writing as well. Why should I be bothered about how great Keats's poetry was? Because I can just type it in. And so again, I have real worries about, and maybe this is where you now kind of, this is why I kind of, as we say, go back and forth between these things all the time about where I am, because, I'm not an artist, far from it, but I appreciate art and I love to, I love to look at art because I do appreciate the talent and the skill that I understand that, Turner had to do to create the playing with the light and how to actually do that and perspective and all of those things. But I can just do that now. And if your pupils are, young people are just able to generate those kinds of things with just, using their words, does that actually then take away from that sort of human aspect and that process of art? I don't know.
Deep. That's deep, Daniel. I've not thought of that side of it though, but you're right. And again, I've two kids, and Isaac, the eldest. I might do that as a little experiment. If we take him to a museum or something, I don't think he's going to be that impressed for that exact reason when he sees paintings and stuff. Because, like you say, he's into Minecraft at the moment, so he's generating these incredible images. Minecraft are involved that, yeah, are going to impress him far more than a painting. Isn't quite. Yeah, and it's not just because it's tapping more into his interest. He's not going to appreciate that painting hasn't just been generated in the same way that he can
Yeah.
generate a Minecraft image, right?
Or that, it took Michelangelo, whatever, 2, 3 years to do the Sistine
Yes.
Chapel. What do you mean someone took 2 or 3 years?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
what?
it. That's
So,
interesting.
and I think that's such an interesting, um, ethical consideration around, all of these things as well. It's, how
So I,
sad would it be? How sad would it be for the next generation to not really give much, interest about art because they just think, well, I can just produce something like that really quickly, or art in the way that I actually really want it. I don't like. I mean, people. Modern art, I don't get, Craig. I'm not gonna lie to you. I
yeah, I'm
don't. I
with you
don't
there.
get
I'm
it.
with you.
I
Yes.
blank canvas with a red dot in the middle. Nah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can take that or leave that. Um, but maybe I'll generate some modern art that really is, in my interest, and then actually, uh, it probably doesn't have the sort of the social kudos that some of these modern art pieces, rightly or wrongly, do have. That's for the art critics and the art community to decide all of those things. But if I'm then sort of, we talk about cultural capital and all of those sort of things, it can really sort of undermine, I think, cultural capital and what we as a society deem as important. If I can just go, oh yeah, but I'm just going to do. I didn't like Tracy Emin's, unmade bed or whatever it was. Actually, I much prefer a messy living room. So, show me that instead. And, all of these other kind of, societal, cultural implications that, again, if we don't think about these things and we don't sort of I think, as a community of educators and as a, wider society and governments and all that stuff sort of guide us through these real tricky avenues, there's a lot to be said by it. And I think again, I'm saying this now because I'm thinking about it and probably just talking about it. So there's probably a bit of recency bias, but I am a little bit frightened of how quick we are going into this in terms of like the government and all of that stuff, talking about, Bridget Phillipson talking about AI this and AI that and all of that stuff. And I do wonder, have we really given it enough thought and consideration that's required on this sort of scale, rather than obviously, yeah, it's going to be wonderful for you know, workload and teachers' workload and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know.
God, this is interesting, this Neil. So I've got three reflections on this. Well, one of them tied into this cultural thing, and then two just based on something you said a little earlier. So I'll go through all three, and then just
Yeah, great.
feel free to react to any or none of them. So the first is whilst talking about art, music interests me. So I play the piano, and it didn't come easy to me, right? So I started from a young age, and I used to hate doing the exams and stuff, and I was so close to giving up tons of times. But my mum was like, keep doing it, blah blah blah, and it was your classic struggle. But looking back, I'm so glad. Like I'm not brilliant or anything, but I can bang out tunes and stuff. So it's quite nice. But I see a lot of things these days through the eyes of my kids. Like, I don't think if we again to talk about Isaac, my 6-year-old, will he ever want to play the piano when he can just generate, any tune he wants, at the touch of a button, type it in, and then like make up his own tune and whatever? Will he want to go through that struggle to come up with an end product that isn't as impressive, perhaps to his ears, as the end
Mm.
product he can get from just typing in a prompt into an LLM? And to bring that to a wider point, I think we touched upon this last time. Just this whole idea of struggle, I think, is problematic. So again, I tried to write a newsletter on this, but I couldn't quite get my point. So let me just chat to you for a sec on it, then I'll see if you can make any. I even put this into Claude. Claude couldn't even understand what I was trying to say, so I knew it was a bad argument. But there's two things that are going through my head when it comes to struggle and AI. So the first is, and then I've talked about this for years, that this productive struggle, I think, is really problematic because you've got to get it really right. So productive struggle is the idea that you give kids things to wrestle with that they don't quite know about yet, and there's some explanatory mechanism happens that during that struggle they're then a bit more attuned to when they're taught how to do something.
Hmm.
And my issue has always been with that research, and I sound like a broken record here. You read all the studies on that. It's either done on undergraduates or top set mathematicians who, for me, associate struggle with success, whereas you get a
Hmm.
bottom set on a Thursday afternoon. You give them a problem to struggle with that they've never been taught. Their pen's going to go down, and they kind of give up. So that kind of struggle, I think, is problematic. But the thing I'm seeing at the moment is like in this age we're in now, I can't see like Isaac, and I know he's only 6, but he doesn't want to struggle at anything because he knows the answer is he could literally type the answer in and get
Hmm.
it. So I'll give you an example from this morning, right? This broke my heart, this. So he's playing with he's got these magnetic cubes, like these everything's bloody Minecraft. He's got these Minecraft magnetic cubes, right? And I was trying to, and he likes building, and he's into like building different rectangles and so on with them. So I thought, I know, I've got a good little puzzle for him here. Do you know the painted cube puzzle? Have you come across this, Neil? It's like I say famous if you're a geek, famous kind of maths problem where if you have a 1 by 1 by 1 cube and
Yeah.
it's all white and you dip it into some red paint and you pull it out and you say how many, well, one's your kind of special case, but that one cube, 6 faces would be painted red on that cube, right?
Yeah.
If you take a 2 by 2 by 2 cube, so 8, and you dip that in and pull it out, you can then say that I think that this will be a low point when I get this wrong. I think all 8 cubes have got 3 faces painted red, right? Now,
Right.
if you take a 3 by 3 by 3 cube and dip it in and pull it out, there's one face in the middle that's got none of its faces are painted red.
Yeah.
That's kind of buried. And then you say, well, how many cubes have got 1 face painted red? How many have got 2 faces painted red and 3 faces painted red? And then you extrapolate that. What happens if you've got a 4 by 4 by 4 cube?
Yeah.
So I'm telling all this to Isaac, and he said, well, we'll just ask ChatGPT. I'm like, no, that's not the point. The point is we're going to try and figure this out ourselves. And it's hard to have an answer to that, right? Because I can't say he's not into this argument about long-term memory, he's not buying that. What he's seen is he's stuck on something and he knows how to get the answer. And it's
Yeah.
your classic, I'll just Google it argument, but taken to
Yeah.
the extreme, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just Googling it anymore. It's literally, I can get that solution out whatever format he needs, he wants it in to please whoever, needs to see that solution. So I just really worry about just struggle just generally going
Yeah.
forward. And it's always been an issue with technology, this cognitive outsourcing, but it's a different level these days, right? And it's hard that, particularly this generation of kids who've grown up with this, it's hard for them to realize why struggle and hard thinking is important, right?
Yeah.
So that's my first ramble. I'll let you reflect on that, and I've got 2 other quick ones.
Yeah, and I think that's comes back down to the whole privileging of product over process,
Yeah,
which again
that's it. That's it.
is, I don't know, the answers are obviously important, but the learning comes from the process, right? That hard struggle and that hard thinking. And yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that it is scary that, you know, a 6-year-old is already thinking, yeah, but the process isn't important. It's I can just get this answer, and then it comes back to like, oh, yeah, who are we doing this for? And I think it's about realizing, that because I think there's always had that argument. Oh, I'm only doing this for my teacher because my teacher
Yep.
wants to see it.
Yep.
I'm not. I think a big conversation that needs to happen with schools is around the importance of that process, but more so on a scale. I'm sure that conversation happens, but I'm talking. Maybe we actually need to, actively teach this and sort of, PSHE, form tutor time, whatever
That's
it is, about actually, like, you need to. It's not about the output just demonstrates, or the product just demonstrates that you've done a process, and that's the stuff where all that hard thinking, comes from, because yeah, it is really, and it's really kind of.
how
Obviously,
do you
I don't have children, so it's kind of quite scary, but nice to affirm that my sort of thinking around it does actually is tying up to, at least, sample of one here. I appreciate that, but
let's go a bit let's go a bit deeper on this now, because I'm interested in this, right? So again, bit of backstory. When I first started researching and writing my How I Wish I Taught Maths book, and I came across all the literature on desirable difficulties and so on,
yeah,
I thought, wow, this is powerful. This idea that if you space things out, it's better than blocking it. And then also I read all the Sweller stuff on working memory capacity. I thought, this is amazing, right? So then step one is, from reading it, it's how is this going to impact my practice? Well, the way it's going to impact my practice is I'm going to space things out. I'm going to be aware of cognitive overload. I'm going to reduce extraneous load, all that kind of thing. But then step two is, how am I going to get my kids on board with this? Because I only teach them for a limited amount of time in
yeah,
their lives or whatever. But I need them to appreciate that when they go home and revise, it's better to interleave and space. It's better to not have to reduce kind of extraneous cognitive load and all that. So then it was a much greater challenge thinking of ways I could get my kids on board with
mm,
various things. And there are ways you can do it, right? So like a classic thing is, if you want kids to appreciate that their working memory has a limited capacity, you can just, fire them a load of random digits, give them 11 random digits to remember, and most kids won't be able to,
yeah,
but give them 11 letters that make a word, and all of a sudden they can do it because that word is in their long-term memory. So all of a sudden they've used their long-term memory to help support their thinking of their working memory. So you do all things like this, right? So it feels to me that step one, to go back to your point, is for schools to be aware, and as you say, I'm sure they are, that they need to be ramming home the message to kids that it's the process that's important, not the output. So there's no point offloading your homework into ChatGPT. There's no point getting Claude to write you an essay, blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
But then it's, how do you convince the kids of that? What's that tangible way you can show them that they go, right, now I see? Because until you've got that,
yeah,
where's their incentive to listen? Where's their incentive to believe you, right? Because they're
absolutely,
just looking at output.
yeah,
And I think that's where, and I think it'll be out there, but you need a couple of little demos that a teacher can do regularly in lesson or whatever, that kids are like, all right, I see it now. And as I say,
yeah,
with the memory stuff, it's doable. You can show them things that, like, familiarity with something isn't the same as knowing it properly. You can
yeah,
show them limits of working memory, but how do you show them that it is in their long-term benefits? And that's the problem, right? Long-term benefits. And whenever you're showing something long-term in a short-term demo, you're in a bit of trouble straight
you're
away.
in trouble.
How do you show these kids? And it's got to be, the thing is now, mate, to make it even harder, you've got to be showing the kids of age 5 and 6 this as well, right? How do you show them in a way that they can understand that it is the process that matters more
That
than the
matters.
output?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I hope you're not hoping. I hope you're not hoping that I give an
Yeah, come
answer to
on.
that
I'll
one.
give you 10 seconds thinking time.
Give me some thinking time
But
for that
maybe we'll
one.
throw this out as a bit of a challenge to listeners, right? Because everyone's aware of this. Everyone's aware that the process matters more than the output. What have been the ways that listeners have found to make that hit home for their kids, to stop
Tangible.
them outsourcing homework to ChatGPT? How do you do it?
Yeah,
How do you do it?
that'd be an interesting one. I think, yeah, where we're fortunate, I think, with the little ones is obviously we still need to teach them how to read, and I'm not convinced that ChatGPT or any of these LLMs are going to be able to do that process because
Yeah.
by the very nature you need to write something. I guess you can speak into it, but even then, I mean, I hope it never gets to that point where it could teach a child to read because that would be then that would be then the
Yeah.
scariest bit of it all. So there's still going to be struggle in that sense for our younger ones. I'm wondering if I don't know. It's hard, right? Do you then actually just have to find something that they're like that real sort of bad engagement sort of thing of finding something that a kid really does properly like and go, the reason that you know a lot about that and you really like
Yeah.
it is because you haven't chat GPT'd much of it or
Yeah.
any of it at all
Yeah.
because but you've spent time watching lots of football or reading those news articles about your footballer or forums or watching those TikToks
Yeah.
about it. And all of that stuff is kind of building up your schema about that, which is why you can go, oh, I think Raheem Sterling isn't a good footballer for these reasons. And you're not having to go to
Yes.
Chat GPT to actually sort of do that. Do you have to bring it such on that sort of individualized, personalized level for them to go, oh, but then they have to be impressed with the fact that they can argue and
That's
reason
it.
and provide argument
Yeah.
or a counter argument for, well, actually, I think Man United are the best because whatever it is, or
Yeah.
insert whatever band here. I think with I remember watching it. What was it? I think it was it must have been the last election where I think it was like the rest is politics like version of it, and you had like Rory Stewart there with like chat GPTing things to produce like arguments for it, and it's like, oh, come on, Rory, like, come on, Rory. I don't know if you're a listener, but like if you're there as this, pundit, political, you have lots of evidently lots of long-term knowledge around um, politic and all of that sort of stuff, then why why are you using chat? You're not helping with those other messages, and I do fear and one worry that it's going to be just another one of those sort of counter messages that are going to come from sort of the media
Yeah.
around normalizing the use of chat GPT for all of these things, and so it becomes, oh, why do I have to do that? So and so on telly doesn't have to uses chat GPT to do it, and and this and that, and yeah, it's a concerning one for sure. And yeah, no tangible other than making it really, almost like hyper individualized to go, the reason why this is because da da da, isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? That you don't have to go to chat GPT. Yeah, I'll definitely, hopefully this won't be our last conversation, Craig. So I'm definitely going to have a little think about that one
Yeah. Well, as I
and
said,
have
we'll
a little
throw the
think
challenge to our listeners
without,
there.
yeah. And the challenge to do it was without using any AI to actually
That,
do,
yeah.
do
How would
that
we know?
yourself.
How would we
How
know? But yeah,
how
there
would
we
we know?
go.
Yeah, but on the music one as well. I'm a guitar player as well. So and yeah, struggled a lot for that. And again, you always go through the ebbs and flows of maybe it's not worth it, maybe
Yeah.
maybe it is. And yeah, Suno's great.
Yeah.
I can get any sort of cheesy thing that I want. And again, I think that's where it comes back to appreciating the human the humanness of what it is to be a
Yeah.
human, is that a human has created that, and really sort of appreciating um, that uniqueness of art, creativity, all those buzzwords that we're worried about, that actually,
Yeah.
all of those things around, competency, all those sort of competencies around, human nature, those things are really important if you want to. But yeah, why there's no incentive, is there really, to, unless, yeah, I don't know. Because then I'm thinking as well, if I can just do that, it's the same argument with the images, right? Well, yeah, why would I go and listen to this band
Yeah.
when I can actually just make this music that I want to actually make and listen to? And yeah,
Well, we'll
it's a
throw the
tough one.
challenge. We'll throw the challenge out there. I'll tell you what, just two other ones because I keep derailing us here. Well, we're never gonna poor Neil Postman. Now we're never gonna get through his
No.
five things here. But let me just two other quick ones on this. So the first is, we're just harking back to what we said at the start when I was describing my experiments I've been doing with this atomizing and trying to get Gemini to produce these things. The reason I've really enjoyed it goes back to your point, Neil, because I've got this knowledge and this experience of trying to generate these sequences by hand and having seen what I consider to be good sequences of questions and not so good sequences of questions. I really enjoy seeing its output, evaluating it, thinking, how can I change that prompt to make it a stronger output and so on. So it's your classic thing we talked about before, right? It's again potentially widening the gap in terms of teacher quality. It's your strongest teachers who are going to get the most out of this
Hmm.
technology because they've got that experience to really know, okay, how do I need to steer this a little bit? And again, if we start in the next generation to get a cohort of teachers who've never had to do that by hand and never had to, yeah, get that into long-term memory, then we're in the same boat. We're in the same trouble as we have with the kids, right? Because you've got no experience to fall back on. So that's, yeah, yeah, that was kind of worrying me as I was having a great time doing it, but I was thinking, ooh, this is a bit problematic going forward. So that was one thing. And then the final thing, let's end this section on a slight positive. This may interest you. Now, again, this sounds more exciting than it's meant to, and more cryptic than it's meant to. But I don't think I can say which company's involved here. But at Edie, we've been doing some work with a big company. Let's say that much. So one thing we do at Edie is we have this option where if kids are stuck on a question, they can request help from a human tutor.
Yeah.
And they can say, I'm struggling with this question. And then the human tutor can see their screen. And then the good human tutors, of course, are saying, oh, I can see why you think this is the answer, but have you thought of this and blah, 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 blah. Now, the problem with that is it's quite hard to scale it, right? So we always try and make sure we've never got more than the ratio of kind of a human tutor to how many kids on the platform. We always try and keep it at a relatively low level so that the human tutor can dedicate enough time to the kids and blah, blah, blah. So what we've been experimenting with in liaison with this other company is that it's your classic human in the loop solution. So
Hmm.
the kid's response gets run through an LLM. The LLM then gives what it would suggest as the tutor, a good tutor response to this, but then the human tutor has to essentially sign off on it.
Yeah.
So we've been running this for about the last 3 weeks with a team of really experienced tutors, and they reckon 99% of the time they don't have to change a single bit of the response. And then one of them said, and this you can imagine the flipping company loving this. This will be a headline. It gives the responses I wish I could give if I had more time. So it's like, yeah, and that's gold. Hey, right now, of
That's
course,
gold.
of course, a couple of things, right? It's a relatively small sample. It's only
Yeah.
99%, so 1% of the time it's going to give a shocker of a response. But a human tutor could give a shocker of a
Yeah. Yeah.
response,
Yeah.
and so on. So that interests me. That it's the again, is that different? Is the human in the loop an important element there, or is hopefully could you phase that out? But then are we still back at square one? Are we making no progress here because we're still relying on the kids being motivated and engaged enough to type and ask for help? And would the kids mind if they knew that? Because at the moment they know a human's involved.
Yeah.
Would they mind if, or they were told ethically, and ethically I guess you're going to have to, that actually no humans involved here? So I just thought that was interesting because it's the experiment's gone better than pretty much all of us at Edie thought it would do. We
Wow.
thought, we were thinking maybe 50% of the messages will get through, but the tutors are absolutely loving it. Well, what'd you make of that?
Yeah. No, that sounds really um, scary. Button
It
makes
is. It
tutors
is scary.
redundant.
Eh?
Probably not the
Yeah.
headline over TES that you want.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But then it's like, and that's where, that's where you got to be like, oh my god, how incredible is that? This is going to solve all the world's
Yeah.
problems, right?
This is it, right?
Let's go, 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 go. Like push the button, make it
This
all
is it.
be like this, and then okay, you have these other conversations that just go, well, at what let's say that 1% is that 1%, but teachers also, as I say, can give absolutely shocking answers, and that's why it's such a quandary. I think even for me right now, it's like it sounds great, but how are people going to earn a living then, Craig?
I know, I
What
know.
you
I still,
what are they going to do?
it's bad this, hey. So where I'm at the moment, again, this will change next time we speak. I'll have
Yeah,
completely changed my mind, but I'm still at the point where I still, back to Peps's point, I still think that initial learning is for the foreseeable future is going to be done with one teacher, 30 kids to
yeah,
rely, to tap into the power of those social norms that,
yeah.
the teacher's there to inspire the kids want to learn together. Learning's a social thing, but then that role, and whether it's for retrieval practice or whether it's for consolidation practice, it feels there that it's probably going to be useful to have that option, that if you want that personal help, if you're stuck on a question and the tutor is smart enough to not just give you the answer, but do what a really good tutor, a human tutor would do, that feels to me like that's got to be a useful thing. But again, I'm certainly not at the stage where you cut the teacher out the initial thing.
No.
So I think this is an add-on, because most schools, well, no school has a limited one-to-one human TAs, right?
No.
Sat with all the kids. So this feels like a useful add-on to learning that's not replacing something that's already happening. That's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
So I can see
And
it
I
role being retrieval or consolidation
yeah.
practice.
And I okay, I kept going with ED. I've not used the platform. But I'm wondering if that actually, there's then that argument of, well, depending on how that pupil is stuck, you can actually divert resources to
That's it.
what is the better need. Now, is
Yeah.
that a point where actually, you know, conceptual versus factual? If someone's just checking on a factual thing, sent to the LLM, but actually, do you know what?
Yeah.
I need to use or model A, B, C to
Yeah.
Cuisenaire rods, whatever it is. So, right, human tutor, you go in for that one because that'll be the next thing. And that is the one sort of safety net I think for maths teachers is that using manipulatives and different models.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if that's just because there's not enough training data out there for these large language models to really sort of go with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe then like that differentiation becomes more important. And again, I'm assuming that the pupils knew that there was an LLM being there,
Yeah.
but then
Yeah.
after 3 weeks, fine. But after 6 weeks, couple of 4 months, is it just the LLM's there, and then as I say, they lose that motivation to do it, and then that
Yeah.
how they then interact with that feedback that the tutor gives versus the thing, and yeah, there's just so many then different avenues to kind of think about
Absolutely.
how it changes behavior, and definitely regarding ED, the interactions with the platform as well, and
That's it.
I don't know. Is ED doing anything to kind of minimize screenshotting and putting it into
Well,
LLM to do it?
how
So
do you do it, right? So again, it's what we're finding is a lot more. Originally, I mean, this is a slight tangent, but I love talking about this kind of stuff. Originally, we were trying to kind of compete as a homework platform, but the problem is, as you may know, I assume it's similar at primary. So many people trying to do the same thing, right? So at secondary, you've got Sparks, you've got MathsWatch, you've got loads of
yeah,
essentially, maths homework platforms. So what we're tending to find now is most people will use it kind of in class. So whether they'll book a computer room or whether they've got
right,
Chromebooks or whether they've got device or whatever. And kids will use it almost like as a personalized independent study session with
hmm
the kind of teacher going around. So your advantage you've got there is it's harder for a kid to get out their phone, take a picture of the
yeah,
screen, or as you say, screenshot it and upload it. But it goes back to our previous point. If they could do that, which they would be able to do if it was homework, whether they'd even bother asking
bother.
the tutor in the first place, they'll just do it that way. So I think that I see that role of technology being one in the future more, that you've got to have that that accountability. Well, that almost kind of checking, right? You've got
Yeah,
to have a human, so a human in the room to make sure you're not using an LLM in a way that it's not intended. Well, that the teacher doesn't intend you to use it. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky
it is
one.
a tricky one. Yeah, very hard. I think I saw something recently. It's been TES or Schools Week. How so it was some um exam board CEO or head of CI who wanted like AI cameras in like rooms to see if kids were cheating or
Wow.
something like that. So
Jeez.
maybe every school's going to have to put some sort of CCTV camera system in their in their computer labs, if those are still a thing, and to check whether that's coming. Because I mean, I'm just thinking as well. There'd be ways to do it without getting your phone out, right? Like you could easily
Of
have a
course.
little AirPod in your ear with the hood up or something
Yes.
like that. Um, and you could have your phone in your bag or
Absolutely.
something like that, not think, and
Absolutely.
you go, oh, I'm talking aloud to really kind
Yeah.
of get this miss to understand it. So what I need to do is take that there, right? I've got
That's
to
it.
find the square of that, and then just go, right, all
That's
those
it.
things that kids
Yeah.
are really good at. All the while, then and it's been fed back an answer in their ear
Exactly.
or something like that. That's
And the whole
kids.
issue with
Kids are
all of
smart, right? They're going to think about that.
absolutely, and the whole issue with all of this, right? Well, there's two biggies, and I promise we'll get on to at least number four after this. Whole issue with all this. One is that as we've touched upon here, the kids not learning anything, or
Yeah.
certainly not they're not learning as much as they would if they were actively thinking hard. Because to use Pepsi's phrase, they're cognitively outsourcing. The thinking's not the hard thinking's not being done by them. But your other issue is you've got this illusion of mastery, right? Because if the teacher's just looking at that final output, and that final output isn't necessarily just one correct answer, it's a whole page of working that the kid has copied down and blah, blah, blah. And that's the proxy that the teacher's using to judge whether the kid's got this and
Mm.
whether they need any more help or whatever. Your whole checking for understanding, your whole diagnostics, all that is just completely
Gone.
out the window, right? So
Yeah.
what? Like, so you've got teachers, like, because there's no other evidence to go off. So
No.
the importance then of those in-class low-stakes assessments just goes through the roof because it's the only way you're ever going to know whether kids have got it. But then to go back to your point, then you've got the time issue. If you're spending a greater proportion of your time having to assess in class, then you've got, by definition, a lower proportion of your time to get through the content, to teach the content. And every teacher will tell you the curriculum's too full. So
Yeah.
you've big problems. You've big
Yeah.
problems.
Massive, massive, say, unintended consequences.
That's it.
What's Yeah, and right now there is no solution or anyone even thinking about these potential things being
No.
problems. I mean, I don't. I see a lot of pro AI stuff out there, quite rightly,
Yeah.
but I feel like there's not that. Apart from our sort of ramblings that we're doing here, Craig,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't feel like there's much caution
That's
being
it.
being considered about these potential implications around how do you make sure, and then what do you do? And then how do you explain, like, they go through this and then they do their exam. They all come out
That's it.
absolutely like, I'm old money me. So what is it? What's the new A star? Was it 9? Is that the highest
9s. Yeah.
one? So yeah. So what? Yeah, they come out with like 2s, but
Yeah.
throughout the
Yeah.
whole
That's it.
thing, like from key stage 3, you've been going like, oh, they're doing really well because
That's it.
Sparks are telling us that they
That's
were
it.
doing
That's it. That's it.
simultaneous equations in
That's it.
October of year 7. I don't know what's happened.
That's right.
It just
I
the
know.
whole thing falls on its head unless you are literally going to go like just literally bring back the slate and chalk and like
That's
literally
it.
it is we're just talking about our pure analog
Yeah.
teaching
Yeah. Yeah.
to ensure that kids are actually doing all this cognitive thinking
That's it.
themselves and not outsourcing it. But then exams want to go, GCSEs, they want to go digital eventually at some point, and so
Yeah.
are we actually going to get to the point where they will code their little large language model helper, and as long as they can use that appropriately, and will it be coded in a way to kind of support them? And actually, are
Yeah.
we going to fundamentally change our relationship with what it means to have knowledge in our long-term memory and all of those things? Because we are going to have little devices that we wear around our necks that just kind of take in all our surroundings anyway, and that's the way that we're going to go. Because it's you had in the news one that Sam Altman and Johnny Ive OpenAI have bought Johnny Ive's new company, and Johnny Ive, again, I feel like it's been a while since I've been on a podcast, but I'm tying this one up really nicely for the next one, Craig, because it's in the
Okay. Yeah. I
example.
like it. Yeah. Go on. I love it.
So Johnny Ive is the chief designer at Apple.
Yeah.
And Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, has just bought his new company, IO, they're called. And say Johnny Ive's background is iPhone, all those Apple products for the last sort of 10, 15 years. He was prolific in that design world. And interesting, real tangent, his father was originally designed the design technology curriculum for schools when the national curriculum
Wow.
first.
Good
So
fact.
there's a nice little thing there. And so that comes to this next sort of So yeah, so they're going to make some weird, interesting AI device, which no one knows what it is yet, but I reckon it's going to be about 2 years until it's out. But rumors are that it's going to be able to see the world, hear the world, and do something to sort of, help people. And again, the more you see that, and the more that that becomes, that advertising. We all saw the iPod, right? Everyone was like, "Yeah, music, great, let's
Yeah,
get all that in." The
yeah.
more kids see that, the more dangerous it's going to be, and the messages that they get from outside the school versus the one they get into school is
Yes.
going to be so different. Um, but that kind of next point around what, and I think it's such a profound one and doesn't really get thought about, is that technological change is ecological and
Yeah,
it's
let's
not
do this one.
additive. And I think that's a nice, interesting thing because once a new technology exists, you can never go back and take that technology away. There's no sort of subtracting it, and the world will just carry on as normal. The world sort of pre-iPhone or pre-smartphone, pre-computer, pre-laptop, um, it doesn't exist anymore, and you could never get it back. Um, and so the point there is that again, it's the irreversibility of these things, and again, why I think we need to caution. There needs to be much more caution in terms of implications around AI in schools and wider, because once we do it, we're not getting it out because
Yeah,
it will be
yeah.
impossible to do so because systems will be built up for it. I generally can't think of a single thing in technology or not technology where actually we've put something into schools and then been able to like take it out completely and get back to like where we were square one without any issues or concerns or anything like that. And so I think this short again it's a short little principle, this one, I think, is that once you do it, you're not getting it out. And so before you put it in, you've got to really consider all these other things that we kind of discussed previously around those unintended consequences and planning for it and really kind of taking that time to consider, which is difficult because you know, technology is evolving at such a rate. I really can't think of any sort of era of technological change, certainly in my sort of last 33 years that we've experienced, other than this uh, phenomenon. And it's scary, and we need to get it right because if we do go gung ho and do it all, I know, go all guns blazing, then yeah, I don't think we'll be able to take it out of society or certainly take it out of schools again. And it's a scary thought and a scary place to be, I think.
And just on that, Neil, again, so the old cliche, well, the cliche that there is around AI is that the current LLMs are the worst they'll ever be, right? They're
Yeah,
only going to get better, and there's arguments to how much better they're going to get and what better means and so on. But there's going to be advancements. But do you not think? So coming to this point, do you not think we're at the stage where it's? I mean, they're already at a stage where, I mean, let's just reflect on this conversation. They've destroyed homework, but we're both agreeing on that, right? They're already at a stage where if a kid has got access to them either in school or out of school, they can pretty much do all the thinking the kid would ever need to do. There's not
yeah,
a subject that is immune, apart from potentially PE or whatever, there's not a subject that's immune to the kid doing this cognitive offloading.
yeah,
Thinking about teachers, they're already at the stage now where a teacher would kind of have to be a bit crazy to not use them to plan. Like, again, put yourself in the ECT's position. I think we spoke about this last time, where, when we started our career, you'd have to spend hours and hours planning your lessons. You would be mad to do that these days, to not do a bit of that cognitive outsourcing to ChatGPT or Gemini or Alia, Oak Nationals thing.
yeah,
So even if things get no better from here, do you not think it's a bit too late for that? Do you not think like
yeah. Yeah, I don't understand. I've finally been able to actually write up these thoughts, which is lovely because time is so precious. And I didn't get AI to do it, I promise. And actually, I didn't. Yeah, it's so good already, and it's there already. And actually, I talk about do we want to take it out? Is at the point that actually it's so ingrained already that we
yeah,
can't take it out, and so actually there is no oh we can just go back to a world without it and carry on as normal. It is just now we have to adapt to the world that we're in because, as I say, it's not additive. So by its very nature, if it's additive, you can subtract it, you can remove it. It's now, as I say, I think he refers to it as ecological. It is now just become
Yes.
part of who we are and what and the world around young people and well, all people, and it's very scary.
We're gonna have to end
Is
on
it
a
too
high
late?
here. Come on, we need. I mean, I'm putting myself at fault here because I've been dragging us down here with a lot
No,
of
not at
negative
all.
thoughts. So let's have we do you reckon we've time in the next few minutes squeeze in the fifth and final one
Yeah,
here?
we
If you do the one
definitely do.
because this intrigued me. This one So just a recap. We'll do a bit of a countdown for people here. So we had number one, all technologies are trade off. Number two, trade offs are never distributed evenly. Number three, technologies embedded philosophy. Number four, the one we've just covered, technological changes ecological. And then I love the sound of this one. Number five, technology tends to be mythic. Go for it.
Yeah, so mythic in this sense just refers to that this technology or any technology could become so ingrained in our everyday lives that we look at it as if it is just part of nature. And so it is
Ah,
something that we
yes.
just always expect it to be. We don't really consider where it's come from. We don't consider how it is that we got here. Um, but it's so common, so everyday that it is like a gift from God. And so the common one for this is thinking about the alphabet. Ask people where the alphabet came from, they'll go, yeah, I've never even thought about
Yeah.
where that came from. It's certainly not a gift from God. It was very much a human creation. And Arabic numerals, right? That's another great example. And base 10. No one ever thinks, why do we do base
Yeah.
10? These things, these are sort of tangible things that have become mythic. We never question these, and likewise, I'm sure the Romans never questioned Roman numerals. Right? It was the system that they had. They used it, and then eventually, we were fortunate that something better did come along in the sort of the place value system, and so when technology gets to that point where it becomes mythic, that we see it as an expectation, as if it is just something that is quote unquote God given, that it is just something that feels like it's part of nature. Um, this is wild, and you see this with young people as well. Maybe with Isaac, like touchscreens.
Yeah.
And now,
Oh, yeah.
does he go to screens and just expect to be able to touch
Of
them?
course.
And
Yep.
yeah, so again, there's another sort of example there of just
Yeah.
how that interactions with things just totally changed because the expectations of, hey, it's a screen, therefore I
Yes.
must be able to touch it. And so when we get to that point, then this stayed we're at, it's as it is, and once it's there, it's really difficult to modify, both in terms of how we expect to be used and crucially that underlying sort of technology that controls it. And as I say, we see it all the time, software updates for phones. I'm updating my phone to the latest software and it changes something, and so I have to build up this new habit of, my muscle memory was telling me how I could do something, or now it's changed. I don't like it. And I think technology, AI is, I think, evidently the same. And I think it is horrifically quickly getting to the point where it is getting to this sort of mythic stage. And if we kind of let young people use AI and expect to use AI in a certain way to perform those certain tasks from the beginning, then when it comes to these wider decisions about having, should we use AI, what's acceptable use, what's not acceptable use, then it becomes akin to almost like you're questioning like the laws of nature itself.
Yes.
Um, and plenty of examples from history. Galileo Galilei, who kind of definitely was questioning the laws of nature himself, and that didn't work out too well for him. And so when we get to this point where it becomes mythic and it becomes unquestionable, what then? What can we do then with this with technology, with with society, with education, when it gets to where this use of AI and this product over process, where it becomes very much the law, feels like, well, no, of course I'm going to use the AI. Like, why would I not? And so it's just that cautionary tale to that bright, happy thing to end on right at the end of the podcast around thinking about, well, when it does get to this point, are we then truly at the point where we are at? There is definitely sort of no going back. Technology has become, or this idea of input, get the output, that is how we just interact. Are we getting to the point where our we don't have conversations. We have conversations with our AI counterparts, and we just sort of start, is that how it's going to, is that where we're going to go? I certainly hope not anyway. But so that's what that last one refers to. And then when it gets to that mythic stage and becomes unquestionable, that really is then, you know, you can't, there's nowhere to go from that.
Flipping out, listeners. Flipping out. There we go. I mean, yeah, it's hard to know how to respond because I'm with you all. I'm with you all the way on this. And yeah, I, f- I, f- I find myself using it more and more and more
Yeah.
these days and expecting to use it more. And I'll tell you, I draw an analogy here, and then I've got one more question to ask you before we wrap things up, Neil. This is a tenuous link, but I'll just go for it. Mini whiteboards, right? So one of my favorite things in the world. I I would now, if you said to me, right, you've got to teach a full day tomorrow and you can't
Yeah.
use a mini whiteboard, I'd be like, right, I can do it, but I will tell you now the end result is going to be nowhere near as good as it could have been because they're so ingrained in my practice now and I see so many benefits from them in terms of getting the data and blah 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 blah. So it'd be a similar thing. So in my day-to-day work now, which often involves resource creation, question writing, physical writing of newsletters. If you said to
Yeah.
me, okay, so you are not allowed next week to use any ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, I'd get through the week, but my output would not be as good. So I am listening to everything you say, and I'm agreeing with everything you say,
Yeah.
but I still want to be allowed to use it, right? This is the problem. So
And that's,
this is it, right? Who's stopping? You know,
and again, we're in that fortunate position. We grew up, we went through our education without
that's it.
it. So
That's it.
you know what you want from it. All of these sort of, again, and the principles are all sort of, it's that perspective of what happens if we let a generation of children grow up with this sort of being the norm.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, there will be evidently implications for, smartphones are just as bad for
Yep.
people. God, even I find myself reaching to it far more
Yeah.
often than I am
Yep.
personally sort of comfortable and um, happy doing. And yeah, it would be really interesting if in a couple of years' time, do we feel like we've actually developed our own long-term memories as much as
Yeah.
perhaps we would have
Yeah.
done?
Yeah. That's
What a
it.
great little, I don't know how you'd control it, but what an interesting little experiment that would be for adults and their own sort of outputs and inputs and all of that sort of that long-term learning. And what we do is, yeah, there's no right answer. I don't
I don't
think,
know.
other
Well, I'll
than
tell you
just
what.
being other
Let me
interesting to think about it.
end on one question because I've been wanting to ask you this. So back to your teacher prompts newsletter, which
Yes.
I'm the world's number one fan of this, and you're still banging them out there. They're coming through every week without fail. So I notice as either last week or the week before you've changed the format of them, and you put like due to kind of listener feedback. And I thought I want to ask Neil. So your readers are predominantly teachers, right? I would imagine the vast
Yeah.
majority of your audience are teachers. I imagine as well across both the secondary and primary sector, predominantly maybe in the UK, but also overseas. And obviously you've got an engaged audience there. People are subscribing to your newsletter by definition because they are interested in the role AI is going to play
Yeah.
both in terms of their jobs and their kids learning in the future. What are teachers, what are your readers telling you they want to know? What feedback are you getting from them that you're thinking, right, I need to kind of direct future output that way? Because I'm just figuring you must be in quite a unique position in terms of, yeah, having a bit of a sense of what a pretty large sample of teachers actually want when it comes to AI.
Yeah, so probably no surprises at all, but it's always good to kind of have data. It's just examples, subject-specific examples, which is where
Yes.
sort of my background as a primary school teacher helps a little bit, but
Yeah,
not
that's it.
too much. They'll get a point where it is, GCSE and that. So,
So as in examples of how how
so
to use it.
prompts. Give me a prompt that we purposely took out the prompt from last one just to kind of see if
Yeah, I
people
noticed that.
would get
Yeah.
angry or not, and they did, which is lovely, because it shows that they that is the bit that they found that they do find the most valuable. And particularly, yeah, subject. Give me a real subject. Give me something tangible that literally I can copy and paste into my into ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever it is that is going to give me what I want, please and thank you. Which is yeah, always interesting. I thought also interestingly enough, the thing that they were least interested in was things around policy and AI ethics.
Yeah, that's it, right? That is interesting.
They wanted resource creation, they want PD, and they want something that they can use tomorrow. That sort of bigger thinking around yeah policy and ethics and what that looks like is different. Now, obviously, that might be because it's skewed because it's
Of course.
teachers. I'm wondering if I dug into that. If you tick the box that said you were SLT, you're probably thinking more about that. But I did think it was still interesting that from teachers, the thing that they want is yeah real sort of tangible prompts that I can just use and try and yeah, CPD. So I do keep on saying to myself, I'm going to do something about that second point. So hopefully over summer, hopefully you might start seeing something. That's a little.
Little
I feel
teaser
like
there for everybody.
yeah, if I tell you, it creates that accountability. That means
That's it.
I'm
There
gonna
we
actually
go.
have to do and spend some time over summer doing something. And I think I think is really interesting as well for like I always think I put everyone with me on day one, right? So I'm like, yeah, okay, people have been
Yeah, that's it.
they've read all like 90
Yeah,
of them.
yeah.
They're with me. I'm bringing them along on this journey.
Yeah,
I've checked for understanding, and yeah, I'm
yeah,
pretty certain. And then it's like, yeah, sometimes I have no idea what you're talking about, and it's like,
yeah,
okay, so
that's it.
sometimes it's always good to go back and revisit some of the core concepts. So yeah, no, it's been yeah, worthwhile exercise. So yeah, from tomorrow, recording this on a Monday, yeah, prompts are back.
Prompts are back. Nice one. Sounds good. Right. Well, we will wrap things up there. If things progress, I'll be speaking to James next at some point, and then we'll get you back on, Neil, and we'll see where this conversation takes us. What's changed in the world of AI, and what we're both thinking about and trying. Obviously, I'll put the link to the Teacher Prompts newsletter. Anything else you want to direct listeners to?
Thank you. The conversations that you're having with Chris are great. I really enjoyed that atomization. It's been one of those things, first things in a long time that have been like, oh yeah, that's really sort of rekindled my thinking of maybe I wasn't such a good teacher after all, or
Yeah.
I could have done something better. So that's been great. Um, Obviously, always going to give a shout out to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education and that podcast. Kieran does a fantastic job at still producing something sort of every week and has done, I think, since he started that. I think it was a fun little lockdown project that we started, and it's kind of gone for that. So if you are a colleague who's just interested in primary education or all aspects of teaching, definitely go and check that one out as well.
Perfect. Well, Neil, as ever, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Definitely. Thanks, Craig.